Welcome, everyone, to the Nourish Together podcast. I am so excited. Today, I have a very, very special guest. She is very special to me personally because we've been friends for a long time. Alejandra Siroka is not only a friend, but a mentor and a guiding light in my life. And I'm so happy to have her here today. Alejandra is the founder of Language Alchemy and host of the Language Alchemy podcast, a transformative communication teacher and coach, helping multicultural individuals, couples, and groups seeking to create and maintain thriving, conscious relationships. Alejandra, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Thais, for having me. And yes, we have been friends. We have been learning from one another, learning together for over a decade.
Yeah, lucky us. And now I
Yes.
get to share some of your wisdom with our listeners. And so, before we go into some of this, the roles of our internal language and our daily choices, which is our theme for today, I would love for you to just share a little bit about your background and your story and how you came to this transformative communication work.
Sure. I have been fascinated by languages and communication since I was a little kid. The particular accent that you're all hearing is a combination from having Spanish as my first language, growing up in Argentina, in the north of Argentina, and then living in other countries. And when I grew up in Argentina, I was born and raised in a city in the north of Argentina called Salta, where there's a lot of tourism. So lots of people would come, different people from different parts of the world. And I vividly remember walking with my mom somewhere downtown and leaving her hand and running to talk to people who didn't look like me, didn't dress like my parents did. And what did I find? That when I talked to them, they spoke a different language, and I had no idea why I couldn't communicate with them. So then I learned that English was a language that a lot of people knew. I started learning English when I was about 5, and I would show up to people and say to tourists and say, "My house is big. This is an apple," because those are the two phrases I knew how to say. But from there, language became a guiding principle in my life because I saw how language had the power to get us closer together, to connect us, to unite us, to heal relationships and ourselves, and also the power that language had to separate, to hurt, to damage relationships, our perception of ourselves and our world. I grew up in Argentina at a time where we had a military government. And so there were certain things that we were allowed to say, certain things we were not allowed to say. People in my family had different political opinions. There were lots of rifts and fights in my family because of how they communicated their different views. And then within my family, my mother is comes from Italian immigrants, my grandmother. There were lots of interrelational issues that was creating a lot of separation and a lot of suffering in my family. So I was really attuned to, wow, just a word can create this chasm between people who grew up together, who were siblings, who maybe loved each other. And with just one word or one phrase, all that can disintegrate. So I became very interested in studying language and communication from that perspective. But I didn't know how to find that, Thais, in Argentina and where I grew up. So the closest I could do for me was to study translation and interpreting, and also to study language acquisition and teaching English as a foreign language or a second language. So I got those two master's degrees, which helped me a lot to understand language, linguistics, so sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, what happens when we learn a language? Why do we learn a language? And
Hmm.
the implications of having two languages. You are bilingual too.
Yeah.
And so when you say something in one language versus another language, you're naming that reality in a different way. And one of my
Yeah.
linguistic professors at the university asked us to bring a definition of language. And we all brought like these lofty definitions from big linguists, known linguists. And then she patiently listened to all of us. And then she said, have you ever thought that language is a way to look at reality? And that, like just those emojis that, make your brain explode. For me, my heart, my mind, everything within me explode. Because then my question was, what is reality? And if language is a way to look at it and to view it, wow, like, and who gets to determine what reality is? So from there, I started a process of being on a path of seeking what reality was. We can call it a spiritual path. And I had the fortune of having my father who had already gone on that path, and he started teaching me meditation and talking to me about esoteric topics and alchemy since I was about 10. And I'm not going to share the whole story, but I moved to another country. Then 99, I came to the US, and years later, I got married. Now, by the time I got married, I had been working on in the field of language and communication for about, I don't know, like 15 years or something like that. So you would think I knew something, a little bit about language and communication, but I didn't. Because when my beloved and I had our first year of marriage, we had a very intense fight. I don't remember what the context of that fight was. And I remember after that, by then I had a robust meditation practice and a yoga practice. I went to a yoga class. When I came out of the yoga class, I realized this was in San Francisco, Dolores Street, for anybody who knows that and now that is familiar to you,
Yes.
Thais. I was
Yes.
walking with my mat, and it dawned on me, wow, I don't really know how to communicate with my beloved because all I'm doing is replicating the way my parents communicated with one another when they were triggered, when they were uncomfortable, when they felt angry or sad with each other. And that realization transformed my life and put me on a path of how can I find the transformative aspect of language that we usually don't talk about.
Right.
From
And how
then,
can we not repeat patterns, right, that are not useful to us?
yes, and they're not useful to us because what I found later is that these patterns are not in alignment with our deepest values, our most profound longings, and the vision that we have for our lives, our relationships, and the world. So
And
at
even
that
starting
time,
there, right? The vision piece, which is so big. Yeah.
the vision is huge because this relationship I had with my beloved, and let's put it in context. I was living in Boston. Now I was living in San Francisco. We decided that, in fact, I really pushed to like, no, let's be in San Francisco. I really loved California and Northern California specifically. And I felt at home there. There was something about that place that feels that, yes, this is where I need to be. And I didn't know anybody. So it was my first year of marriage. I didn't know anybody but my beloved, whom I had met 8 months before we got married. We fell in love. It was, movie like romance. And then we're like, okay, let's get married. But I was living in Boston. He was in San Francisco. And then we needed to decide where to live. And I was like, let's go to San Francisco. So within that, he was the main person I was communicating with consistently, constantly. I didn't have other people around me yet. I didn't have a community yet.
Mhm.
And so my invitation at that after that yoga class was to go within and to look at how I was communicating with him. That was what I realized was there was no chance, 0% of chance that I was going to be able to fulfill the intentions I expressed to Matthew, my beloved, in front of our family and community when we got married. That is to say, our vision. There was no way I was going to fulfill that vision of our marriage if I continued communicating in the way I was communicating. And I'm just going to name what that was. When I felt
Please.
uncomfortable, when I felt sad, when I felt disappointed, when I allowed myself to tap a little bit into anger, which was an unfamiliar feeling for me. And because my beloved did or said something, I would do a couple of things, including shutting down, giving him the cold shoulder, stay silent, not be able to make eye contact. I would try to, even though I may stay there in the room with him, I I was not there. I had vacated myself.
Mm.
And to put things even more into context, my beloved is an attorney. He went to school and learned how to argue and win an argument. Oh, if I talk to the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, and not just spend the rest of my life with, but I want to grow with until my last breath. If I talk to him in this way to try to win an argument, there's going to be winners and losers. He's going to win every time. And I don't want to have a marriage in which the parameter for satisfaction is a winner or a loser. I
Mhm.
want something deep.
Yeah, beautiful. And, arriving at that, I love that you share the moment too of realizing what your vision was and how there's no way to fulfill it if you're shutting down and if you're not able to communicate with somebody, especially with somebody who's been trained to communicate, even though I feel like that applies to all couples. And sometimes it might be the man that just shuts down and goes out, right? Or sort of escapes the conversation altogether. And it's really hard to come to any kind of agreement or a new vision or become solution minded when one person just completely withdraws. So then what has so after having that realization, what came next?
Well, what came next was a lot of study, exploration that I studied nonviolent communication for about 8 years, went to all the retreats, the train the trainer retreats, the leadership retreats. Then I continued looking for working with and studying with meditation teachers, teachers from ancient wisdom traditions, where there was some component about the inner dialogue or the power of language or skillful communication. And and so I studied mainly with tantric teachers from Indian traditions and Buddhist psychology, and in Tibetan traditions. And then I went back to school to CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I did a program that's called Transformative Leadership within the School of Consciousness and Transformation, where I studied the transformative aspect of language and communication. And that was my focus. And after that, language alchemy was born. And many people ask me what language alchemy is. And language alchemy is unlike other communication approaches where you have an issue and then, okay, you need to say this phrase, or if you say it in this way, then maybe you can solve that issue. That's how I started working. But what I found over the years was that people would come back and say, well, that technique didn't work because people were learning communication as a technique, and many people were learning communication as a soft skill.
Mm.
What language alchemy is something very different. It has three main components. It has an individual component, which is an awareness practice, awareness of how we're using language first and foremost in our internal dialogue, and that is to say our intrapersonal communication. And then the second component is a communication approach that's relational, and that has to do with how we're using language and the impact that language is having in our relationships and how we're maintaining, developing, building relationships with others, and being conscious of that. That is maybe where more of the techniques, if you will, come, but they are grounded on awareness. So it's a complete communication approach that's grounded on awareness. And then the third component is a social component, which is an evolutionary activist practice in which we consider what is the vision that we want to have for the world. And that includes us understanding our biases, understanding how we treat other precious human beings, and the impact we want to have with our language and communication, and the legacy we want to leave in the world based on leaving a legacy of equality, equity, and understanding that unless we all collaborate with one another, our beautiful planet and our beautiful human family is not going to make it.
Yes, that is the sad but true reality that's kind of facing us right now. And I feel like this is a very pivotal moment. Wow, so thank you so much. It is such a rich journey, and I can see the deep love and respect that you have for the process and for the work that you do, and being able to accompany that over the years, and knowing of the many people and couples that have been able to really find more peace, more connection, more love, really, because now they can really fully open up to one another. And so it's really very special to have seen the transformation that you have helped create in the world.
Thank you.
So I have some questions. I'm wondering, as far as the many tools that you share with your clients, and as you talked about that first step being the awareness, which is actually where I think we should start. How can you help somebody develop the awareness of what their internal language is? And especially, knowing that we have so many repetitive thoughts out of the maybe 60,000 thoughts, and there's some variation on the number of thoughts that a person has each day, but it's thought that a big percentage of that, up to 80%, are repetitive thoughts. How does one start becoming aware of what those thoughts are and the language that's used in those thoughts and those thought patterns?
Yeah, thank you. So this is where awareness practices like meditation or mindfulness that allow us to develop an inner observer. So we're about to say something and we ask ourselves, what am I about to say? Or we go through our day and we stop to consider, what am I thinking right now? What am I saying to myself? These are just very simple practices that we can have throughout the day. Something else that I like to give my students and clients is to go for a walk and take this device. I'm holding a phone in my hand for those of you who may be listening but not watching, and pretend that we are talking to someone, but take that inner dialogue out loud and say things out loud so that we can hear what we are saying. You were talking about how we have about 60,000 thoughts or 66,000 thoughts. Some linguists say that, and that most of these thoughts are repetitive. We need to find what are they repetitive about? Because most of the time, they are repetitive about either ourselves, about telling us who we are, or they're repetitive about our relational configuration with others, telling us who the other is in relationship to us. And that has huge implications for the decisions that we make in our lives, how we live, how we communicate, whether we have healthy relationships, whether we have a healthy life, whether we're growing or we are stuck in some past version of ourselves and frozen there. So the first thing I would say is try to either say something out loud if you don't have a meditation practice or mindfulness practice. Say out loud what you're thinking. Start in the shower. Say out loud what you're thinking. Listen to that voice. And when you hear those messages, then ask yourself, what are these messages saying about me? Because most of the time, those messages are not true. They're just stories. Furthermore, they are stories that we have heard during our first 7 years of life from our parents and main caregivers, our teachers, and our society. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're in the shower and you're thinking something like, oh, I have so much to do today. I don't know that I have time, but I need to get all these things done and I need to get really good at them. Oh, and now I'm thinking about, oh, if I don't make this dish that I thought I was going to make for my family, or and then a lot of anxiety starts to come in. But you don't even know that you're having that anxiety unless you are able to really listen to, wait a minute, how am I talking to myself? And now let's go and look at how you are talking to yourself in just maybe early in the morning, if you shower in the morning and you're starting your day that way.
Yes.
So what you're saying to yourself is, I don't have a lot of capacity. There is not much I can do. Life is filled with shoulds. Life is an obligation. Things are right or wrong. If I do the wrong thing, I will be somehow punished or I'll have a bad experience. If I try,
yeah,
or I may not be lovable. Others may not love me. If I don't make that dish, my family may not love me, and so then they're going to abandon me, and they're going to love somebody else more than they love me. And wow, if this is how we're going to start the day, that is going to have a huge impact on the rest of the day. The clothes we decide to wear, the first activity we decide to do, even if the first activity we decide to do is to make that dish, that meal for our family, it's not going to come from a place of love. It's going to come
or
from a place of
escaping.
obligation.
Yeah. And I find that especially today with that we have our devices and we have these ways of getting dopamine through social media or whatever, when all those uncomfortable feelings bubble up and it brings up all that stress, we might go into the escape where it's like it's just too uncomfortable. And now we're dealing with, other ways to kind of soothing. And I love that you mentioned about the first 7 years of life, because often I feel like those voices or that language that we're using, it's not even our own voice or our own language. It is really imported. And I find that for me and the work I do with my clients, I often ask people, what is the first thought that comes to your mind when you look at yourself in the mirror? Being aware of that, right? Is there a thought of love, a loving, kind message that's coming out toward yourself? Or is it always like, oh, I look like crap, or oh, I didn't get enough sleep, or, all these sort of critical and judgmental and even thoughts of rejection towards ourselves. So if we can start the day in a place where A, we're aware of that, but B, can start really shifting that conversation and understanding, is that really my own? Would I say that to myself? Would I say that to somebody I love every day? So yeah, thank you for bringing that. Um, did maybe there was more you wanted to say too about this awareness? So apologies if I interrupted you.
Well, no, that's beautiful. And I think that once we have that awareness, like you were saying, the second question I like my clients and students to ask themselves is, yes, we can ask ourselves, is this mine? But I usually ask them, who does this agree with? Who does this idea that, going back to the shower example, that I'm not capable, that I'll never have enough time to do all the things I would like to do, that I need to be lovable and I need to show my love through my doing and not my being. Who do those ideas agree with? Usually it's not us. Usually it's not our values. Usually it is beliefs that we have inherited and language we have inherited from others. And especially, I'm so glad you talked about when we look ourselves in the mirror. You and I, we were born and identify with a female body. And the all the messages that we have had in society about the value of women equals being beautiful according to some external standard that's not
Right.
even ours. And what if beauty didn't matter? Many times I ask my beloved, how many times do you think about how beautiful you are? How many times do you think about what you're going to wear, what your hair looks like? And many times he's looked at me and said, huh? Like a deer in the headlights, like, what do you mean?
What?
And
Yeah.
yes, and as you can all hear, my beloved is male, so we are in a heterosexual relationship, and so he did not grow up with any of those impositions
Expectations and impositions.
and
Yes.
expectations, but we have. So what if, when even before we look at ourselves in the mirror, when we wake up in the morning, we can sense into our true being, that which is unchanging, no matter if we're 50, 77, however old we are. What if we could just tap into the actual jewel like quality of who we are, that essence, and we're able to feel into the gratitude of another day? This is my life. I get to be in this beautiful life. Then we start the day differently. Then we go to the mirror and we look at the mirror and we say, yes, this is my life. And that beauty idea is not even there.
Yeah, it's so true. And the even the idea of having light beaming out of our eyes, like that's beauty, right? Regardless of the face configuration or the body shape and size, there's a different kind of connection to divine beauty. And I love that you said that, because one of the first things I invite my clients to do is hand in the heart, hand in the belly before you get out of bed. Feel your breath, the gift of another day, of another breath, of all that our bodies do 24/7, every single cell, all the microorganisms. We are this community. We're actually a community. We have this illusion of being this one solid thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we see as you and me. But we're a community. And so being able to connect to that deep place of gratitude, of essence, the jewel like essence, as you mentioned, the breath, and the opportunity of a new day is so important for having a day where it does feel like opportunity and possibility and enjoyment, versus waking up already thinking, I've got so much to do, which is a very different way to start the day, right?
Yes. And even if we have hardships, I imagine that many viewers and listeners here are saying, oh, well, that's so lovely when things are going your way. And how about when there's disease? How about when you need to take care of someone? How about when there's poverty? How about when there's war and people are being killed? How about when we tap into the real suffering of our world? Well, we get up in the morning and that's when we say, I am so grateful I'm here because I can be of support. I can be an agent of healing. I can be an agent of peace. I can contribute to my family right now. I have the capacity to take care of my sick partner or parent or child. Or, yes, I don't have the financial resources I need right now. And I have other inner resources that can help me find the financial resources or can orient me in a way in which I can find what I need in multiple ways. And then again, we put ourselves in the place of the possibility and the opportunity, but especially in the place of capacity. That we are here and as adults, we are capable of speaking to ourselves in a way that we can face whatever life has in store for us.
Because, and that's coming back to that capacity and possibility, letting every cell in our body know that we trust our capacity to heal, our capacity to support someone else, or our capacity to find a solution for our financial problems. Everything in our body follows suit. When we engage more with the thought of, I can't, say with your shower example, right? I think everybody listening can already feel the stress when we're going, I don't have time for anything, and I'm not going to get through this day, and it's going to be really stressful. Our bodies believe our thoughts, and there's a cascade of events that happens because we start releasing cortisol. I mean, there's a true physiological response that's happening to every
Yes.
thought. And it's affecting our vagus nerve, it's affecting our immune system, it's affecting our cardiovascular system. We start producing less of the really amazing neurotransmitters that help us feel good, like serotonin, GABA, dopamine. Our digestion changes. So it's like there's so many areas and systems in the body that get affected by our engagement with the thoughts. And so we have a real, true choice. We may not have choice over our circumstances, but we have that choice of how we start the day, how we maintain sanity within our own internal language so that we can navigate the world in a little bit brighter space. Yeah.
Yes. And that choice starts with awareness and developing awareness. So, just going back a little bit, the first step is to become aware of the dialogue that we have internally. What part of that dialogue is about ourselves, what it says about ourselves, what part of our dialogue is about others, and what it says about others in relationship to us. I gave you some examples of speaking out loud, taking yourself for a walk, using your phone if that's useful. The second thing we talked about was to understand that this is not yours. This is something you have inherited. The language you speak is a language you have inherited. Someone and a lot of people taught you what to say when you feel angry, sad, elated, enthusiastic, overwhelmed, stressed, neutral. These are things that you didn't come to the world with. You come to the world with the ability to express yourself and communicate, but the language we use has been taught and passed down to us. So we need to ask ourselves, who do these things, these words, these thoughts, these beliefs agree with? And then the third thing we need to do is to understand the impact. So you were talking, Thais, about the internal impact in our internal community. And then we need to look at what is the impact that this inner dialogue is having in the closest relationships with our most intimate others. Then we can look at what is the impact that this internal dialogue is having not only in our closest relationships, but also in our larger communities and in our belief systems about the world and the kind of world we want to live and potentially inhabit right now with others. So this is when we can see, just like with language alchemy, I was saying it's individual, then it's relational, and then it's social. With the evolutionary activism, when we learn to communicate authentically, that is to say, when we learn to communicate as the beautiful, mature adults that we are in alignment with our values and our vision, then we learn to look at the impact and see, is this the impact I want? And if it's not, it's time to work on your communication. And is this the legacy I want to leave in the world? Is this the world I want to inhabit? And if the answer is no, then it's time to work on our communication and look at our biases and the values that we have and the values that we want to perpetuate in not just in the future, but also in the present, especially if we're parents, the way that our internal language is then impacting how we then are becoming our children first communication and language teachers, and the
Yes.
beliefs we're imposing on them and the language we're imposing on them. And that's going to be perpetuated. So these are all the three levels we need to look at and how we can start from the internal dialogue. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you so much for summarizing it so beautifully and kind of returning to it, because I think that's really clear. And I hope people listening, watching, um, really capture that. And I'll put it on the notes too, so that we have those 3 steps. That's so powerful. Um, how, I mean, you've already given so many examples of this, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about then how is that impact in our relationships once we understand how our patterns of communicating internally are either helping causing peace or allowing for peace or causing stress, and we've maybe applied some of those ways of really identifying, oh, and is this aligned with my values and my vision? No. Then we kind of can shift into how would I align that so that then we can communicate more clearly. And maybe at the end of that, I really want to come back to children, because that's certainly a big interest
Yeah.
of mine, being a mother, and often asking myself, how am I influencing or imposing um, my own stuff into my child, who I want to be a free thinker, a critical thinker, somebody who can inhabit his own essence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And knowing that, yes, as the ego forms, I'm going to mess up many times, because as parents, there's no perfect parenting. And so there will be an imprint in his ego for sure. But how can I also help him then start questioning these things, right? So yeah, so back to that first question of like, once we identified, how can we start shifting that into how we communicate?
Well, the first thing we need to do, so this awareness practice is based on listening. If you've all been paying attention, it's all about listening to ourselves. Then we need to shift into, okay, if we realize that what we hear in our internal dialogue is somebody else's, it was an imposition, it was conditioning, it agrees with somebody else and not us, then we need to connect to what truly matters to us. What matters? So is for some of us, it's going to be love. For others, it may be safety, connection. It may be compassion, collaboration. And of course, it will also depend on the context, because communication, there's no formula in communication. Communication depends on the context. That's how it's authentic, when it's spontaneous and context aware. So we need to look at what are the values that are important to us, and then look at how we are communicating and behaving, because every behavior is communication, how we're communicating and behaving, that it moves us away from our values. And here is where we have a crucial choice. That crucial choice is when we look at things that we're doing that are away from our values, we can look at it from a perspective of right and wrong. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. Now
Again.
I am terrible. I am, I'm such a loser. When am I going to learn? I'm not a good person. And oh my gosh, then we're back to what are we saying to ourselves? How is that impacting us? We're going back to the beginning, awareness of that. Or that way of looking at the world, looking at ourselves, looking at our behaviors, looking at our language is a world that most of us is a kind of language and a paradigm that most of us have inherited, the right wrong paradigm that leads us to war. It leads us to war in our hearts. It leads us to war with one another. It leads us to war with our nations. And that's what we're seeing in the world we're living in. It is a language of war. When we are caught up in the right, wrong thing paradigm, we are going to have a war where someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to be wounded or killed. And we use language like, I'm killing it, I'm crushing it. I cringe when I hear that language because we're still using all this language that it's about to feel good means I need to conquer and dominate and kill it and crush it and destroy. What if in that crucial point when we realize that we have moved away from our values, we say to ourselves, oh, I'm moving away from these values. How can I come back to what matters to me? That Beautiful. Is a much more simple and humble way of coming back to what matters to us. And by the way, that kind of language is transformative.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no ickiness inside. There's nothing we need to fight. We're not at war. We're just noticing. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we're not wasting our energy getting stuck into that a whole other realm of, again, stress causing thought patterns, right? That just takes away, literally robs our energy. So beautiful the way you put it, because now if we can just see, oh, this is what I'm doing, how can I get back? Now we're solution minded and we can use our beautiful, valuable breaths to go into that direction versus getting stuck into the right or wrong, good or bad.
So this is when language becomes really alchemical. And for anybody listening, whenever we hear someone saying, oh, we need to work with our mindset, what they're really saying is we need to work with our language. We need to transform our language. But it's not just about imposing. I don't give my clients and students affirmations. I am this, I am that, because that would be, again, another imposition. And what I teach people is to communicate authentically and to find those affirmations, if they're useful for them, from within, from their own wisdom nature, which is much more powerful than anything I could tell them or say.
Yeah.
So when we do that and we say, oh, let me come back to what matters to me, now our language, our communication is completely different. We are doing that in a resourceful way. We're resourcing ourselves back and coming back to our capacity. The same thing with children. When children, you wanted to talk about children, when children are doing things that do not agree with us, that are not in alignment with our values, well, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, okay, what are our values? What are they doing that I'm uncomfortable with? Where is this discomfort? Is this discomfort something I inherited? Is it okay for them to explore something that I'm uncomfortable with? And then if we need to guide them back, we guide them back through connection, not through chastising, shaming, criticizing, which is, again, using a language of war with our children. So we come back through connection. And then what we do is a lot of listening and sometimes talking.
And then the notion of having a family vision, which I think is so important, even with children who are young, it's still possible to create something where you have a clear sense of how you want to be in the world. What are the things you want to contribute to, right? Contribute to healing nature, for example, right? Or ways to contribute to the community, or just ways to experience more joy that kids can get that too. And so then in those moments, it can become easier to say, well, let's come back to how do we come back to joy right now? Or how do we come back to being in peace with our community? Say if it's about
Right.
a fight or something like that. And I wonder if I can ask you, Alejandra, in that moment when you realized with your beloved that you were communicating in a way that wasn't in alignment with your values, how then did you shift to come back to how you wanted to then communicate and be in alignment with your values with your spouse?
I learned to be completely honest and humble with the way I was communicating. I learned to see how painful that was for me to communicate in that way, how painful, how much pain it was causing to my beloved. So the impact that my communication had, and see that clearly without, again, punishing myself, but saying, no, I want to see out of the love that I have for myself and for this man and the vision I have for that we both have for our marriage. And then I learned how to communicate differently by studying different communication approaches and coupled with meditation and wisdom traditions to connect deeply to what is truly me. So when we are children, Thais, what happens is that our brains are not developed. Our sense of self is not developed. And so the language that we hear from our parents when they tell us, you are too shy, you are too loud, you're too much. Why are you so angry all the time? Why are you so sad all the time? Whatever it is that they're telling us.
Mm-hmm.
We take that at face value and then we believe that those things that we keep hearing from our parents and caregivers are us.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look at, is that really us? No, it isn't. What is really us? Of course, there's an interconnectedness where we all have essential and intrinsic goodness and lovability and capacity and intelligence. And then there are flavors of us that are more about not only our personality, but also, well, some of us have tendencies to different things that make up who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to find that, and then we need to learn how to communicate that. That requires shifting our communication. But first, we need to get honest and humble with how we are communicating. We cannot shift. If you go to any communication workshop where what you're going to learn is techniques and skills without looking at the impact of what you're doing right now, without getting really honest and transparent and humble with yourself, and vulnerable with yourself and seeing how you are communicating now, then that's not going to shift.
Right.
Then we're going to relate to others at a superficial level because that's just going to be another imposition. But when we become adults in our communication, we understand that so many of these things that in the past when we were children came from the outside, they need to come from within, and they do.
Right.
So that lovability doesn't depend on others, doesn't depend on us making that meal. That safety, that sense of connection, that sense of capacity doesn't depend on whether we did 3 things in our to-do list or 10.
Yes. Can everybody take a deep breath and take that in right now? Because um, Yeah, it's so important. And I think some of us operate in that way without even thinking about it, right? Like it's not that we're making the conscious decision, well, I have to do all these things and sacrifice for my family in order to be loved. We may not be doing that from a rational kind of recognition standpoint, but we might be operating under that assumption because of these old patterns,
Yes.
old language ways that we've been talking to ourselves. And again, following somebody else's version of reality and what's in agreement with them versus what we can really feel into and have a sense of value right now about our lives, about ourselves. And this the notion of growing, deepening self-love is such a guiding principle of the work that I do, because in holistic nutrition, people can have the perfect diet for their body type or exercise a lot and do all these things, but if those internal dialogues or internal language isn't addressed, there's always something missing. And it's harder to make choices that come from a caring, loving place.
Yes.
Those choices, sometimes the eating or the exercising can come from a sense of punishment and a sense
Mm-hmm.
of, if I don't do this, then I'm not worthy. And so that shifting that, I feel like it's such an important piece to connect with that self love. And so, what would you say in your understanding what a language of self love might look like or sound like? And again, obviously, everybody's going to have their own. And like you said, even with the affirmations, like it has to come from your student or your client. But are there some more general phrases or thought or feelings that you associate with that deepening of self love in your internal language?
Yes. So to me, it comes in the form of questions and not statements, because questions linguistically open and energetically open us up to possibilities, whereas statements claim something and make something solid that may be changing,
Mm-hmm.
and make something unchanging that is temporary. So, questions that we can ask ourselves, be out of love, is what matters to me in this moment? What do I need right now? What are the capacities that need to show up within me right now to be in this conversation, to make this change in my life? What is the vision that I want to have at the end of the day of who I have been? And when we ask ourselves those questions that are open questions, they're not yes, no questions. Am I good or bad? Am I this or that? But when we ask ourselves those questions, like even like you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you can say, oh, well, everybody's having, I'm a pescatarian. I don't eat meats. And I could look at the restaurant at the menu and say, well, everybody's having burgers. I should not be left out. And what are others going to think of me? That would have been my old way of thinking. Or I can look at the menu and say, what does my body need right now? What would be nourishing to me in this moment that would allow me to enjoy the company of these friends or these situations? And
And
then I
still
can
stay
choose from there.
true. Yeah. Enjoy company and stay true to my values, which, in your case, like, I don't need to eat meat to belong, right? Or
Yes.
again, the open
Yes.
question.
Yes. And, for those of you who are listening, because let's look at the context. Because I grew up in Argentina, and in Argentina, meat is a big component of not only food, but also belonging.
Mm.
Not not eating meat was for me a journey of authenticity, where I had to depart from what I have learned from my family and my culture that was the quote unquote good thing and how you belong, and do something else and still belong and still be authentic and still be lovable and loved and safe.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. This has been so rich. I feel like we may need to have a second because there's so much we can still talk about in this topic. I just am deeply grateful for you sharing your wisdom and your journey. And please tell us a little bit how people can find you. I know there's a really very informative quiz on your website right now
Yes.
around self sabotaging communication habits. And I think self sabotaging is one of those things where I think it's so important. It's another piece of awareness that if we know what are the things we're doing to sabotage our deepest desires, then we can start changing, right? We can start removing obstacles for ourselves. And so, please tell us a little bit about your website and things that you might have coming up.
Yes, of course. You can all find me at languagealchemy.com. It's beautiful when we want to make deep changes and transformations to be in community of others. Just like when people come to your cleanses, Thais, and to your groups, and this is when we feel, oh, I'm not alone. It's not just me. And then you are surrounded with a community of people who are also on that same path. That is not only so powerful, but we know from all these sciences of transformation and change that being in groups is what truly supports us in our transformation. It's the greatest catalyst. And so going going back to that, yes, my website is languagealchemy.com, and you can find me on Instagram at languagealchemy, Facebook, same thing. And I have a quiz to help you bring awareness to your communication and specifically to that self-sabotaging communication habit that is not allowing you right now to have the kind of life and healthy relationships that you long for and that you deserve. The word deserve, the etymology means to be of service. So you are going to find that in that quiz, what is that communication pattern that is not of service to you and to those around you? To find that quiz, you simply go to languagealchemy.com/quiz, and then you find it. And once you take the quiz, you are going to get a mini video training from me, which has 3 parts. It's a 3-video training where you're going to be working. It's not just about being aware of that, but what do you do once you're aware with that sneaky habit, right? That self-sabotaging habit. So then you're going to get a mini training as to how to start working with that habit. And then I invite you to sign up to my mailing list, because in my mailing list, which you can also find at languagealchemy.com, when you sign up to my mailing list, every week, every Wednesday, you are going to get not only personal stories in which I share how I am working with communication or how I'm working with clients with communication, but you're also going to find steps. For example, last week I shared 7 steps of how we work with our internal dialogue when things are not going our way. And I also have a podcast, which is called the Language Alchemy Podcast, which is now in its 3rd year, and it's being listened to in 48 countries, which I'm so excited about. So yeah, so you can do all those things. I do group coaching. I have one coming up in the fall at the end of August that you can check out if you go to languagealchemy.com. So all those opportunities. I would say for now, start with a quiz and then maybe listen to some podcasts. Join the newsletter.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for being here.
Oh,
For all that
thank you
you do.
so much. Thank you. And thank you also for the beautiful work you do. I've seen you grow and shift perspectives, and in a way that you're going deeper and deeper. So I'm really appreciative of what you do, Thais, and I love you so much.
Oh, love you. Bye.
Bye.